Institute, and I'm very excited that we are having 4 awesome papers in this session, and one of which even got an honorable mention award. So please don't forget to vote for the best talk on your mobile phone app, and the first talk is going to be given by Elisa Giaccardi on foundations of material experience. So, Elisa, do you want to come up?
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good morning, everyone. Today I'd like to present a framework that Elvin, Karana and I have developed to discuss how materials shape ways of doing and ultimately practice, and how this is rooted in the experience of those materials. This is a difficult paper to present. It's one of those in which you risk to say either too little or too much. So what I'm trying to do in the next 15 minutes is to highlight part of the frameworks that can justify why on earth we need yet another framework. The motivation for this work originates from observing how digital technology is increasingly implicated in our everyday life, and how this is the result of a quite complex relationship between the properties and embodiments of material objects and the practices that develop with and through such objects. So the framework takes a materialist perspective to work out the link between our very first interactions with a particular material and those interactions that develop into peculiar ways of doing. In other words, the link between what we refer to as encounters and as performances. So, given this background and motivation, what is the concrete contribution of the work? The main contribution is that it provides a vocabulary that is for once summative, which actually builds on strands of research in HCI that, with different emphasis, provide an understanding of how material interactions work and how they sit in relation to the unfolding of personal and social life. Specifically, this vocabulary connects practice-oriented accounts of materiality in HCI to the roots of experience design. There is no time for properly unpacking the related work here, but important understandings we integrated in the vocabulary and that have been produced within these strands of research include, for example, the idea that qualities of materials are not fixed, but are to be encountered and experienced in practice. That our material performances with and through objects are fundamental to the development of personal and social practices, and that materials and practices collaborate to shape each other. However, once notions of material encounters, performances, and collaborations are integrated in an initial vocabulary, the question remains of how people, materials, and practices actually come into relation with each other in a given design. By addressing this question is where the paper actually makes its original contribution to such a vocabulary. And the question is, how can a design mobilize materials in the unfolding of practice? But before continuing, I want to clarify 2 things. First, that when Elvin and I talk about materials, we emphasize the properties and embodiments through which physical objects can be encountered and performed. And second, that when we talk about practice, we emphasize the repeated performance of an activity, a way of doing, that is carried out through and with and through the materiality of an object. We do not refer specifically to the carrying out of exercise of the profession. To illustrate how materials can be mobilized in the unfolding practice, I'll discuss two concrete design cases. These, together with others presented in the paper, were selected out of a benchmarking, a design benchmarking of 78 artifacts, which used material aspects and emphasis on practice as criteria for mapping. QLIC is a digital artifact that uses RFID-enabled wooden chips to take digital media and memories from the cloud and materialize them in a rather evocative way. These wooden chips can contain any digital content, from Spotify playlists to Instagram photos to Netflix movies. They can be personalized in their appearance and can be collected as a digital souvenir or shared as gifts. As the collection of chips grows, digital media become sort of immortalized in a wooden honeycomb-shaped collage. Now, how does the design of QLIC mobilize materials? The emotional character of digital content contained in the chips is put into effect by the use of wooden chips exhibiting a texture that feels warm, both visually and at touch. Meanings related to the content of the chips are then materialized as images and signs printed and engraved on the warm texture of the wooden surface, giving them a vintage appeal. This revisited vintage appeal of images and signs on the surface of the wooden chips promotes a feeling of nostalgia. And by nostalgically collecting and arranging these wooden chips in a mountable wall plate, digital content can be archived in the form of a collage and made available for casual readings. So, in the case of this digital artifact, it is the warm character of wood to frame the encounter with digital content. But whether made of wood or other material, the chips would still be able to function as tapestry elements. So here, the link between the proposed practice of personal archiving as a collage is realized through the existing codified practice of making a collage and the meaning we culturally ascribe to such a practice. Seaboard Grand instead is a musical instrument that reimagines the piano keyboard as a soft, continuous surface, combining the intuitiveness of a traditional instrument with the versatility of digital technology. Through continuous touch, this artifact enables the user to sound a note and then take the note on a musical journey, modulating its pitch, volume, and timbre through one continuous gesture. Compared to a traditional keyboard, the material feels soft to touch, it's elastic, slightly resists to pressure, and makes no sound. In a highly intertwined sensorial manner, the softness and ductility of the product and the way its material enables new ways of playing an instrument may bring us to interpret the artifact as highly advanced. These perceptions of softness and ductility and the meanings attributed to the artifact as catenage captivate interest and attention. And by engaging in moving and rubbing the hand over the board, the user gains tactile control of the sound and explores a new organic way of playing music. Now, in this case, how the silicon is formed in response to touch invites us to experience this familiar yet different musical instrument. And the difference obviously comes with the material choice. Performing on the seaboard is intimately linked to the sensorial, interpretive, and affective qualities of interaction with the specific material. These cases illustrate how people, materials, and practice are implicated at 4 experiential levels. Our first encounter with materials occur at a sensorial level through touch, vision, smell, sound, and taste. This sensorial component of experience is inevitable. Materials, with their inherent properties, impact our senses. They do feel in a certain way. The interpretive level concerns instead how we interpret and judge materials. Meanings we attribute to materials are usually personality characteristics and associations, such as feminine or modern, traditional, cutting edge. These meanings are not factually part of a material's properties or embodiment. A material is not literally feminine or masculine. The affective level concerns our affective dispositions. Emotions arise often unconsciously, triggered by our beliefs and attitudes. We can be fascinated or disappointed by the qualities of a material. For example, the easily scratched surface of an electronic device might disappoint us, and the extreme softness of a lamp might surprise us. These emotions create different affective dispositions. If something disgusts us, for example, we are less likely to interact with it. Such perceptions, meanings, and effects significantly influence the performances we establish with and through objects. Their unfolding into unique and peculiar ways of doing, and their assimilation into practices, and vice versa. Together, these levels configure what we call a material experience pattern. Now, when performances are intimately linked to the affordances of the material, and I use here affordance in its original ecological understanding, we say that the pattern is broken. When this is the case, designs tend to rely on social and cultural meanings that are socially and culturally codified. When instead performances are intimately connected to the affordances of the material, then we say that the pattern is active. When this is the case, people might explore and develop unanticipated practices. So though expressing aesthetics in which social-cultural meanings are highly codified, like the vintage look of Kulik, is not wrong, we believe that this is limiting from a design perspective. Attending to the aesthetic aspects of experience as much as to its performative character can pave the road to a new way of designing digital artifacts. Not only can enable designers to be more effective and be able to create a situation in which an envisioned practice is more likely to develop and unfold, but more importantly, it is a powerful strategy to empower people to improvise and assimilate a design within their ongoing everyday performances. This is of critical importance in a scenario where computation is steadily moving from conventional devices into everyday objects. So, in conclusion, the materials experience framework proposed in this paper brings together practice-oriented accounts of materiality in HCI and experience design with the goal to integrate and expand the vocabulary for speaking of how materials shape ways of doing, ultimately practice, and how this is rooted in the experience of those materials. This vocabulary articulates how people, materials, and practices are implicated at 4 experiential levels, and how these levels together configure different material experience patterns. These have been illustrated through design cases. Such a framework, we believe, can help designers set design goals for each experiential level and their interconnections in a material experience pattern. In future research, these design goals can work as hypotheses towards the development of design guidelines and possible material-driven methods. Thank you.
So we have time for a couple of questions, so if you just come to the microphone. Okay, maybe I just ask a question. So have you also considered materials that maybe decay or grow over time, so they actually change over time?
Yes, I do in my research. In this paper in particular, we do not make a distinction on the state of matter of the material, but certainly, for example, materials that decay, that produce traces, are also a very interesting way of implementing such a material strategy. So, yes, of course, yes.
Hi.
Kia.
Hi. Hey, Kia Höök from Mobile Life at KTH. This was fantastic, really beautiful work and very useful, I think. But I was thinking, could you develop a little bit about your thinking on the 4 levels, experiential levels? Isn't there a risk that if we divide these, we sort of forget that they are so tightly connected and not really separable all the time? I'm sure you thought of it, so can you just develop that a little bit?
Yeah. No, this is a very great question, and we really tried hard in the paper to explain that these are non-sequential levels, and they are highly intertwined, as you say. But as designers, we need to start from somewhere. So being able to reflect on how you can mobilize materials at those different levels and how these different levels actually interconnect and impact on each other, I think can be very useful for designers to have some sort of structured approach to the way in which you can use materials in a way that is really leading of the experience. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, Mareike Glöss, Uppsala University. Yeah, thank you. I agree with Kia. This was really interesting and very well presented as well. But as Kia already said, I mean, all these 4 instances are very, very strongly entangled. So it would, maybe you could elaborate a bit on how exactly this kind of coupling between material and performance, encounter and performance in the end will materialize in the design process itself. Like how can the designer, for example, untangle the meaning and so on that maybe in a device that hasn't been developed yet will come. Is it clear what I mean?
I think,
yeah.
So yeah, if I understand your question, you're asking for more details on how the designer can actually go about working on these levels.
Yeah, working on the level of meaning and this cultural understanding.
Right. So in terms of meaning, there's a lot of research being done, for example, in product design. And so there is there already quite an established vocabulary and a set of tools that can be used. There isn't much yet with respect to how to connect those understandings and those tools to the performative aspects. And the paper, the work so far, doesn't provide an indication really of how you can do that. And that's future work for us to do. And it was mostly to lay out the ground for how can we start connecting these levels and think of how the materials are mobilized at these levels. So the idea is that, and that's what also we're doing with some initial prototypes, is to start taking to build an hypothesis on how that can be done, and then through a research and design process, see whether that's the case or not, and eventually down the road develop these design guidelines and methods I was talking about.
Yeah, and that's definitely going to be interesting, I think. Thank you.
Okay.